So, Google just dropped something that sounds like it's straight out of a sci-fi movie, but I promise you it is very, very real. It's called Project Suncatcher, and the plan? It's to literally build the future of AI in outer space. Which, makes you ask a pretty wild question. We've always thought about tech growing right here on the ground, but what if the next giant leap for artificial intelligence actually happens up there, among the stars? So what exactly is Project Suncatcher? Well, it's what Google calls a moonshot, and for once they mean it literally. The whole goal is to create this massive AI infrastructure up in orbit, all powered by constellations of satellites just soaking up solar energy. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds incredibly complicated, not to mention expensive. So why on earth would you do this? Well, the answer really comes down to one fundamental, massive problem that's facing the entire AI revolution. Its unbelievable need for energy. You see, the data centers that run these powerful AI models like Gemini, they consume electricity at a staggering rate. Some folks are estimating they could soon use as much power as a small country. Our power grids here on Earth, they just can't keep up. So Google started looking for an energy source that's, well, practically infinite. And that's where the core advantage of space comes in. It's pretty simple, really. Down here, solar power is intermittent, right? You've got nighttime, you've got clouds, you've got the atmosphere getting in the way. But in orbit, a satellite gets constant, 24/7 access to direct, unfiltered sunlight. That consistency is a total game changer, because it means you don't need these massive, heavy batteries. And this quote just illustrates the logic perfectly. It's almost comically simple. If you need a constant source of sun, you go to the one place where it never sets. And that place is called a sun-synchronous orbit. It's a special path around the Earth that keeps a satellite in perpetual daylight. Okay, so we get the why, but what about the how? How would this actually work? Let's break down the tech that could really make Project Suncatcher a reality. It really boils down to three key pieces working together. First, you've got swarms of solar-powered satellites. They're both the power plants and the housing for everything. Second, each of these satellites is packed with powerful, specialized AI chips for all the processing. And third, they all talk to each other using incredibly fast optical links. Now, the hardware here is absolutely crucial. Google's going to be using its own custom-built AI chips called Tensor Processing Units, or TPUs. The easiest way to think about them is like supercharged graphics cards, but instead of running video games, they're designed specifically for the massive calculations that machine learning needs. All right, now for the communication part. For this whole constellation to work like one giant computer, these satellites have to send huge amounts of data back and forth at insane speeds. They do this using something called free space optical links, which basically uses beams of light to transmit data through the vacuum of space. And yeah, you read that right. Free space optical links is just the fancy technical term for what are essentially space lasers. Freaking space lasers connecting a whole swarm of AI satellites. The future is definitely now. Okay, this all sounds amazing, but it also sounds incredibly difficult. So what are the big hurdles here? Can this actually work? Well, Google's own research paper tackles the two biggest ones head on. So the two main challenges are, one, keeping all the satellites perfectly lined up so those laser links don't break, and two, making sure all the sensitive electronics can survive for years getting blasted by space radiation. So let's tackle that first one. The bandwidth of these space lasers, it drops off really fast with distance. So to get the kind of performance they need, something that's on par with a data center on the ground, these satellites have to fly in an incredibly tight formation, staying just a few hundred meters apart from each other at all times. So, is that even possible? Well, according to Google's own physics models, the answer is yeah. They found that keeping this stable constellation actually only requires these modest regular adjustments. It's something that's well within our current tech, so we can pretty much check that problem off the list. Okay, now for challenge number 2, radiation. Space is just flooded with it, and it can absolutely wreck electronics. Over a typical 5-year mission, a satellite in this kind of orbit is expected to soak up about 750 rads of radiation. And trust me, that's a pretty significant dose. So can the hardware even handle that? This is where things get really surprising. In their testing, Google's TPUs survived a dose of over 15,000 rads with no hard failures. They are, and I'm quoting the paper here, surprisingly radiation hard. I mean, they can take more than 20 times the expected dose. So yeah, the core hardware, it's tough enough for the job. All right, so the technology seems feasible. The physics checks out. But there's always one final, massive hurdle for any project that involves going to space: the cost. Can this ever actually make economic sense? Well, it all comes down to a single number. Right now, launching just 1 kilogram into low Earth orbit costs at least $1,500. For Project Sandcatcher to make any kind of financial sense, that cost has to come way, way down. And here it is, $200 per kilogram. That is the magic number. If the cost to launch gets down to $200 a kilo, building an AI supercomputer in space becomes just as cheap as building one on the ground. The big question is, how in the world do we get there? Well, the answer lies in this economic principle called the learning rate. All it means is that for every time you double production, the cost for each unit falls by a pretty consistent percentage. And for SpaceX rockets, that rate has been a steady 20%. So more launches actually mean cheaper launches, and suddenly the path to that magic number becomes a lot clearer. So with a clear technological path and a plausible economic model, this whole moonshot starts to look less like a crazy dream and a lot more like a real roadmap. And that roadmap has some surprisingly soonish dates on it. We're not talking about some far-off future plan. Google's actually partnering with Planet to launch the first 2 prototype satellites by early 2027. That's to test the hardware and those space lasers in a real-world environment. And hey, if SpaceX keeps up its learning rate, this entire project could hit that $200 price point and become economically viable right around 2035. I mean, it is a project of staggering ambition, one that could totally redefine our energy infrastructure and the future of AI. It makes you wonder about the ultimate goal of all this tech, which is just perfectly captured by this recent quote from Elon Musk. Perhaps our purpose is to make the mind of a sentient sun. A truly mind-bending thought to end on.